Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. Bryce Matthews stood in front of the mirror, fixing his tie for the third time. His fingers shook a little as he straightened the silk. The clock on the nightstand said 7:15 p.m. They were already late for the party. He got no reply. With a sigh, Bryce went downstairs. He could hear glasses clinking and laughter coming from the kitchen. As he turned the corner, he saw Isla pouring herself a big glass of red wine. "There you are," Bryce said, forcing a smile. "We should go. There might be bad traffic." Isla turned around, a smirk on her face. "Relax, Bryce. It's just a casual get-together. No one cares if we're a little late." Bryce's smile faltered. "But it's our anniversary. I thought maybe we could skip the party, have a quiet dinner, just the two of us." Isla rolled her eyes, taking a long sip of wine. "God, you're such a bore sometimes. We can celebrate later. This party is important." "Important how?" Bryce asked, his brow furrowing. "Networking, darling," Isla replied, her tone condescending. "You know that thing successful people do?" The jab stung, but Bryce swallowed his hurt. He'd grown used to Isla's cutting remarks over the past year. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong. "Fine," he conceded. "Let's go." The drive to their friend's house was tense and silent. Isla spent most of it tapping away on her phone, occasionally letting out a soft chuckle at whatever she was reading, his knuckles turning white. As they pulled up to the house, Bryce noticed an unusual number of cars lining the street. "Looks like there are more people than usual," he said. Isla shrugged, already opening her door before the car had completely stopped. "The more, the merrier," Bryce said as he walked behind her up the front path, feeling uneasy in his stomach. When they reached the door, Isla turned to him with a strange look in her eye. "Ready?" she asked, her hand on the doorknob. Before Bryce could answer, Isla opened the door wide. A group of voices shouted, "Surprise!" Bryce took a step back, surprised. The entryway was full of familiar faces, friends, co-workers, and even some family members. A large banner hung across the living room. "Happy anniversary, Bryce and Isla." "Well, what is this?" Bryce stammered, his eyes darting from face to face. Isla's laugh rang out. Sharp and hollow, "It's a surprise party, darling. For us. Aren't you thrilled?" Bryce forced a smile, accepting handshakes and hugs from well-wishers. But inside, his mind was reeling. He'd wanted an intimate celebration, a chance to reconnect with his wife. Instead, he was thrust into a sea of noise and forced small talk. As the night wore on, Bryce found himself drifting from conversation to conversation, lukewarm beer. He scanned the room, searching for Isla. She disappeared almost immediately after their arrival, leaving him to fend for himself. Finally, he spotted her across the room, deep in conversation with a man he didn't recognize. The stranger was young, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of chiseled good looks that belonged on a magazine cover. Her hand rested on his arm, lingering a moment too long to be casual. Bryce's chest tightened. He started to make his way over, but the crowd seemed to close in around him. By the time he got to the spot where they had been standing, Isla and the mystery man were gone. "Looking for someone?" a voice asked. Bryce turned to see Sarah, one of Isla's closest friends, giving him a sympathetic look. Sarah's face changed, showing both pity and discomfort. "I think I saw her go out to the patio with Chase." "Chase?" Bryce said, the name feeling strange to him. "Yeah, you know Chase, the new guy from her yoga class. I thought you had met him before." Bryce shook his head, a cold feeling of dread settling in his stomach. "No, I don't think I have." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, realizing she'd said too much. "Oh well, I'm sure it's nothing. You know how Isla likes to chat." But Bryce wasn't listening anymore. He muttered a quick, "Excuse me," and made his way to the patio doors. Through the glass, he could see Isla and Chase standing close together, their bodies angled towards each other in unmistakable intimacy. Bryce's hand hovered over the door handle. Part of him wanted to burst out there to confront them both. But a larger part, the part that had been ignoring the signs for months, held him back. He needed to be sure. So he waited, watching as Isla laughed at Chase's jokes, as she touched his arm, as she leaned in close to whisper something in his ear. With each passing moment, the truth became clearer and Bryce felt his world crumbling around him. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Bryce pushed open the door. The cool night air hit him like a slap, momentarily steadying him. Isla and Chase turned at the sound, their faces a study in contrasts. Chase looked mildly surprised, perhaps even a bit guilty. But Isla's expression was one of pure indifference. "Bryce," she said, her tone flat, enjoying the party. Bryce struggled to find his voice. "Isla, what's going on here?" Bryce asked. Chase looked back and forth between them, his face showing that he understood. "Wait, is this my husband?" Isla smirked a little. "Yes, Chase, this is Bryce." The way she said it, as if she were introducing a casual friend instead of her husband of 10 years, hurt Bryce deeply. "I don't understand," Bryce said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Isla, why are you out here with him?" "It's our anniversary." Isla rolled her eyes and took a step closer to Chase. "Oh, please don't act so shocked. It's not like you didn't know this was coming." "No, it was coming." He already knew the answer. "This," Isla gestured between herself and Chase. "Us? Did you really think I was happy playing house with you? That I was satisfied with your pathetic attempts at a career while I carried us both?" Each word was like a dagger, but Bryce stood his ground. "So you've been what? Cheating on me? For how long?" Isla laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "Longer than you'd like to know. Chase here understands me in ways you never could. He satisfies me in ways you never have." Chase, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Shut up, Chase," Isla snapped. "You don't owe him any explanations." Bryce felt a surge of anger rise within him. "And you think you don't? After 10 years of marriage, this is how you tell me it's over? At a party, in front of all our friends?" Isla shrugged, her lack of care hurting Bryce more than any show of emotion could. "I figured it was time to stop pretending. You're a loser, Bryce. You always have been. I'm done wasting my life waiting for you to become someone better." Her words felt heavy and final. Bryce stood there frozen as Isla turned back to Chase. Without hesitation, she pulled him into a deep kiss right in front of her husband. When they broke apart, Chase had the decency to look ashamed. But Isla's eyes were cold as she stared at Bryce, daring him to react. "You see," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is what a real man feels like. This is what I deserve." Bryce felt something inside him snap. Years of doubt, of trying to please Isla, of believing her cruel jabs were just stress or temporary frustration. It all came crashing down. In that moment, he saw Isla for who she truly was. A selfish, manipulative woman who had never truly loved him. "You're right about one thing," Bryce said, his voice low and steady. "This charade is over. But you're wrong if you think this makes you strong. It just shows how pathetic and small you really are." Isla's eyes widened and used to this version of Bryce. For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. But before she could respond, the patio door opened again. A group of party guests came outside, laughing and talking. They paused when they saw the intense scene in front of them. "Hey, what's going on out here?" someone asked. Isla's calmness returned immediately. She put on a smile and wrapped her arm around Chase's waist. "Oh, nothing. Just introducing my husband to my new friend. Right, Bryce?" Everyone turned to look at Bryce. He could feel the weight of their stares, could see the confusion and growing realization on their faces. In that moment, he had a choice. He could make a scene, could expose Isla for what she was, or he could walk away with what remained of his dignity. Taking a deep breath, Bryce straightened his shoulders. "If you'll excuse me," he said, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. "I think it's time I left." As he turned to go, he heard Isla's mocking laugh behind him. "That's right. Run away. It's what you do best." Bryce paused at the door, looking back one last time at the woman he'd thought he'd spend his life with. "No, Isla. Running away is what you've been doing for years. I'm just finally seeing it clearly." With that, he stepped back into the house, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As he made his way through the crowd, he could hear the whispers starting, could feel the pitying glances. But for the first time in years, Bryce didn't care what anyone else thought. He walked out the front door, into the cool night air. His marriage was over, his life as he knew it shattered. As Bryce got into his car and drove away from the party, from East Law, and from the life he thought he wanted, he felt something surprising: relief. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: he would never let anyone treat him that way again. As the first light of dawn appeared over the horizon, Bryce Matthews made a silent promise to himself. He would rebuild his life, making it stronger and better than before. And Isla would soon realize that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The silence in Bryce's car was overwhelming as he pulled into the driveway of what he used to call home. His knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel, and his jaw was clenched so tight it felt like it could break. The events of the party replayed in his mind like a cruel, never-ending loop. When he stepped out of the car, the cool night air did little to calm the fire burning inside him. Bryce stood there for a moment, staring at the house he and East Law had shared for the past decade. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. Now it was just another lie. The sound of tires on asphalt broke through his thoughts. East Law's car pulled up, parking haphazardly behind his. She stumbled out, her designer dress slightly askew, her perfectly coiffed hair now a disheveled mess. Well, East Law slurred, her words thick with alcohol and disdain. Look who decided to come home after all. Bryce turned to face her, his expression hard. We need to talk, Isla. She laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. Talk? Now you want to talk? Where was this desire for communication when I was suffocating in this pathetic excuse for a marriage? Suffocating? Bryce repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. Is that how you justify cheating? By playing the victim. Isla's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty. You're the one who's been holding me back all these years. Holding you back? Bryce's voice rose, anger finally seeping through his calm facade. I've supported every decision you've made, every whim you've had. I've worked myself to the bone, trying to give you the life you wanted. Huh? Isla spat. You call this the life I wanted? Stuck in suburbia with a man who can't even satisfy me in bed. Isla's harsh words hurt, but Bryce didn't let it show. Instead, he stepped closer to her, keeping his voice low and calm. You know what? You're right about one thing. This isn't the life either of us wanted. So let's end it. Isla's eyebrows raised in surprise for a moment before she hit it with a look of indifference. What are you saying, Bryce? You want a divorce? That's exactly what I'm saying, Bryce replied, feeling stronger with each word. I'm Don Isla. Done with your manipulation, your cruelty, your constant belittling. I deserve better than this, and I'm finally ready to admit it. For a moment, Isla seemed taken aback by Bryce's newfound assertiveness, but then her lips curled into a sneer. You deserve better? Don't make me laugh. Who do you think would want you? You're nothing without me, Bryce. Nothing. The words hung in the air between them, charged with years of resentment and unspoken truths. Bryce felt something shift inside him, a dam breaking, releasing all the pent-up anger and hurt he'd been holding back. You're wrong, Isla, he said, his voice steady and strong. I'm everything without you. I'm free. With that, Bryce turned and walked towards the house, leaving Isla standing in the driveway, her mouth agape. As he reached for the door handle, he heard her stumbling after him. You can't just walk away from me, she shrieked. I won't let you. Bryce paused his hand on the doorknob. He turned to look at her one last time. You don't have a choice. It's over. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, blocking out Isla's continued protests. In the quiet of the house, Bryce took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle on him. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was going in the right direction. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of legal meetings and tense moments. Bryce focused on his work, finding comfort in the routine and knowing he was building a future for himself, not for Isla's endless demands. One evening, while Bryce was packing up the last of his things from their shared home, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Chase standing there, looking uncomfortable and a bit out of place. What are you doing here? Bryce asked, his voice flat. Chase shifted his weight, avoiding Bryce's gaze. I came to apologize. I didn't know about you and Isla when we first. Bryce leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms. And that makes it okay? No, of course not, Chase replied quickly. I thought you should know that Isla, she's not who I thought she was either. Bryce raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Chase sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's been, well, let's just say I'm not the only one. There've been others, man. Lots of them. The information shouldn't have surprised Bryce, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. He nodded slowly, processing the revelation. Thanks for telling me, Bryce said finally. But it doesn't change anything. What's done is done. Chase nodded, looking relieved. I get it. I just wanted you to know the truth. You seem like a decent guy, Bryce. You didn't deserve any of this. As Chase turned to leave, Bryce called out. Hey, Chase, the younger man paused, looking back. Word of advice? Run. Run far away from Isla. She'll destroy you if you let her. Chase nodded, a sad smile on his face. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. Take care, man. As Bryce watched Chase walk away, he felt a mix of emotions. He was angry about the betrayal, but he also felt a sense of satisfaction. He had been right about Isla all along. Just then, a car pulled into the driveway. Isla got out, her eyes narrowing when she saw Chase walking away. What was he doing here? She demanded, storming up to Bryce. Bryce stood his ground, unfazed by her anger. Telling me the truth. Isla, something you've never been capable of? Isla's face paled slightly, but she quickly recovered. Oh, please, like you're some paragon of virtue. You're just as much to blame for this marriage falling apart. No, Isla, Bryce said, his voice firm. I'm not perfect, but I never lied to you. I never cheated on you. I never intentionally hurt you. That's all on you. Isla's eyes flashed with fury. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're better than me? You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. In that moment, something inside Bryce snapped. All the hurt, all the anger, all the years of enduring Isla's cruelty came rushing to the surface. Before he could stop himself, his fist hit the wall next to him, causing the drywall to crumble. Isla jumped back, her eyes wide with shock and a little fear. I'm a good man who wasted years loving someone who didn't deserve it. But that ends now. He turned and walked back into the house. When he returned, he was holding a stack of papers. What are those? Isla asked, her voice shaking slightly. Bryce held them out to her. Divorce papers. I've already signed them. Your turn. Isla stared at the papers, disbelief etched across her face. You can't be serious. You'd be nothing without me, Bryce. Who's gonna want you? With your pathetic job and your inadequacies? The words were meant to wound, to make him doubt himself. But Bryce stood tall, unmoved by her attempts to manipulate him. Sign the papers, Isla, he said calmly. It's over. For a moment, Isla looked like she might argue further. But then, something in Bryce's expression seemed to finally get through to her. With shaking hands, she took the papers. She spat. You want a divorce? You've got it. But don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you're making. Bryce watched as she scrawled her signature across the dotted line, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders with each stroke of the pen. I won't, he said simply. As Isla shoved the papers back into his hands, Bryce caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Was it regret? Fear? For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she sneered, putting her mask of indifference back on. Enjoy your freedom, Bryce. I hope it keeps you warm at night. With that, she turned and walked to her car. Bryce watched her drive away, the taillights fading into the night. He looked down at the signed divorce papers in his hands, feeling a mix of emotions wash over him. It wasn't the end he'd imagined for his marriage. But as Bryce stood there in the quiet of the night, he realized it was the beginning of something new, something better. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. As he walked back into the house's house, Bryce made a silent vow to himself. He would rebuild his life stronger and better than before. And Isla, she would soon learn that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life in underestimating him. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Bryce Matthews was done being anyone's punching bag. It was time to start living life on his own terms. The weeks following the divorce filing stretched into months. Each day a battle in what was becoming an increasingly bitter legal war. Bryce sat in his lawyer's office, poring over the latest financial documents. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished mahogany desk, highlighting the deep furrows etched into Bryce's brow. "So what you're telling me is that she wants half of everything?" Bryce asked, his voice tight with barely contained anger. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Matthews. Ms. Eastlaw is claiming entitlement to 50% of your assets, including your business." Bryce leaned back in his chair, a humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "Of course she is. Why am I not surprised?" Rachel leaned forward, her tone becoming softer. "Mr. Matthews, I know this is hard, but I need you to understand something. Eastlaw's demands aren't just aggressive. They're almost delusional." Bryce's eyebrows raised in surprise. "What do you mean?" Rachel let herself smile a little, clearly pleased. "Well, it seems Ms. Eastlaw wasn't as thorough in her preparations as she thought. The prenuptial agreement you had drawn up before your marriage? It's ironclad." A wave of relief washed over Bryce, quickly followed by a surge of vindictive pleasure. He remembered Eastlaw's dismissive attitude when he'd suggested to prenup, her condescending laugh as she'd signed it without even reading it. "Little Bryce," she'd said, patting his cheek, always so cautious. "Don't worry, I'm not after your money. I have my own." "So what does this mean exactly?" Bryce asked, leaning forward eagerly. Rachel's smile widened. "It means, Mr. Matthews, that Eastlaw's claims to your business and the majority of your assets are null and void. The prenup clearly states that in the event of a divorce, each party retains their individual assets acquired before and during the marriage." Bryce felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax slightly. "In the house? Joint property?" Rachel replied. "But given the situation with your separation and Eastlaw's actions, we have a strong case for you to keep full ownership. She will get a settlement, of course, but it won't be close to what she's asking for." Bryce nodded, thinking about this information. "She's not going to take this well," he said, more to himself than to Rachel. The lawyer's expression became serious. "No, she won't. Be prepared, Mr. Matthews. When Eastlaw realizes her plans are falling apart, she may resort to desperate measures." As if on cue, Bryce's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Eastlaw's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a photo from happier times. Bryce stared at it for a moment, remembering the woman he thought he'd married before declining the call. "Speak of the devil," he muttered. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Eastlaw?" Bryce nodded. "She's been calling nonstop for the past few days. I think she's starting to realize that things aren't going her way." "Don't engage with her directly," Rachel warned. "Any communication should go through me or her lawyer. We don't want to give her any ammunition to use against us." Bryce agreed, thanking Rachel for her time before leaving the office. As he stepped out onto the busy street, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Eastlaw. "We need to talk. Meet me at our old place. Please." Bryce hesitated, Rachel's warning still in his mind. But part of him, the part that had loved Eastlaw for so many years, couldn't help but wonder what she wanted. Ignoring his better judgment, he drove to their old house. As he pulled into the driveway, memories rushed back. He remembered the day they moved in, full of hope and plans for the future. He recalled the many arguments that had echoed through those walls and the moment he realized his marriage was over. Eastlaw was waiting on the porch, looking unusually messy. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. As Bryce approached, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, poorly concealed by makeup. "Bryce," she said, her voice softer than he'd heard it in years. "Thank you for coming." He stopped at the foot of the stairs, maintaining a safe distance. "What do you want, Eastlaw?" She took a step towards him, her eyes glistening with what looked like unshed tears. "About us, about everything that happened." Bryce crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "And I realized something," Eastlaw continued, her voice wavering slightly. "I made a mistake, Bryce. A huge mistake. I was stupid and selfish. And I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me." Bryce felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a mix of old pain and new suspicion. "What are you saying?" Isla, she descended the stairs, stopping just in front of him. I'm saying I'm sorry. I want to fix this. Us. I still love you, Bryce. I always have. For a moment, Bryce felt a spark of his old feelings for Isla. The woman in front of him reminded him of the girl he had fallen in love with so many years ago. Vulnerable, sincere, and beautiful. But then he remembered the harsh words, the constant put-downs, and the cheating. The mask slipped, and he saw Isla for who she really was. No, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. Isla blinked, clearly not expecting this response. No, what do you mean no? Bryce took a step back, creating more distance between them. I mean, no, Isla, this isn't real. Your apology, your declarations of love, it's all an act. How can you say that? Isla cried, reaching for him. I'm baring my soul to you. Bryce dodged her grasp, his eyes hard. You're not baring your soul. Isla, you're trying to manipulate me. Again, let me guess, you found out about the prenup? Isla's expression faltered for a split second, and Bryce knew he'd hit the mark. That's what I thought, he continued. You're not sorry. You're scared. You thought you'd walk away from this divorce with half of everything I've worked for, and now you're realizing that's not going to happen. That's not true. Isla protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I really do love you, Bryce. We can work this out. I know we can. Bryce shook his head, a sad smile on his face. No, Isla, we can't. The truth is you don't love me. You never did. You only love what I can give you. And now that you can't have it all, you're trying to get back in? Isla's facade fell apart, and her face twisted with anger. You ungrateful jerk. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? Bryce laughed, but there was no humor in it. Everything you've done for me? You mean cheating on me? Humiliating me in front of our friends? Trying to take my business? I made you, Isla shrieked, her carefully cultivated image of remorse completely shattered. You'd be nothing without me. No, Isla, Bryce replied calmly. I made myself. Despite you, not because of you. And I'm done letting you take credit for my success. He turned to leave, but Isla grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Don't you dare walk away from me, Bryce Matthews. I'll ruin you. Do you hear me? I'll tell everyone what a pathetic, impotent loser you are. Bryce gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. Go ahead, Isla, tell them whatever you want. But ask yourself this, who are they more likely to believe? The successful businessman who's never said a bad word about his ex-wife? Or the woman who publicly humiliated her husband and tried to take everything he worked for? Isla opened her mouth and closed it again, unable to find the words. For the first time Bryce had known her, she seemed truly lost. Goodbye, Isla, Bryce said, turning away. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. But I promise you it was never me. As he walked back to his car, he heard Isla's voice, small and defeated. Bryce, please, don't leave me with nothing. He paused and looked back at her. In that moment, he saw not the manipulative woman who had made his life difficult, but a scared, lonely person who had never learned how to really love. You won't have nothing, Isla, he said softly. You'll have what you came into this marriage with, plus a fair settlement. It's more than fair considering everything, but more importantly, you'll have a chance to start over to become someone better. I hope you take it. With that, Bryce got into his car and drove away, leaving Isla standing alone in front of the house that had once been their home. As he watched her figure grow smaller in his rear-view mirror, he felt a sense of finality wash over him. It was really over. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and paperwork. True to Rachel's word, the prenuptial agreement held up in court. Isla's attempts to claim half of Bryce's assets were swiftly shut down by the judge. On the day of their final court appearance, Bryce arrived early, steeling himself for one last confrontation. Isla swept in just minutes before the hearing was set to begin, her head held high despite the obvious strain in her eyes. As they waited outside the courtroom, Isla approached Bryce, her voice low and urgent. It's not too late, you know. We could still fix this. Bryce met her gaze steadily. There's nothing to fix, Isla. It's over. Before she could respond, the bailiff called them into the courtroom. The proceedings were mercifully brief. The judge reviewed the terms of their divorce settlement, which granted Eastlaw a modest payout and nothing more. As the judge's gavel came down, ending their divorce, Bryce felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He turned to Eastlaw, expecting to see anger or resentment. Instead, he was surprised to find her looking lost. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "After all these years, it just ends like this?" Bryce nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of sympathy. "Yeah, that's it. Take care of yourself, Eastlaw." He turned to leave, but Eastlaw's voice stopped him. "I really did love you once, you know." In the beginning, Bryce looked back at her, a sad smile on his face. "I know, I loved you too, but sometimes love isn't enough." With that, he walked out of the courtroom and into the bright sunlight of a new day. As he descended the courthouse steps, he saw a group of familiar faces waiting for him, friends who had stood by him through the whole ordeal. Sarah, Eastlaw's former best friend, was the first to speak. "So, is it done?" A genuine smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, it's done." There was a moment of silence, and then cheers erupted from the group. Bryce found himself enveloped in hugs and handshakes, surrounded by people who truly cared about him. As the impromptu celebration died down, Chase approached, looking uncomfortable. "Hey man, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry again." For everything, Bryce considered the younger man for a moment before extending his hand. "Water under the bridge, Chase. Let's just move on." Chase shook his hand, relief evident on his face. "Thanks, Bryce. You're a better man than me." As the group broke up and made plans to continue the celebration at a nearby bar, Bryce stayed back for a moment. He looked up at the courthouse, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment. He remembered the man he was when he married Eastlaw Young, naive and desperate for approval. He thought about the years of subtle manipulation, doubting himself, and trying to be someone he wasn't just to make his wife happy. Then he thought about the man he was now, stronger, wiser, and free. As he joined his friends, laughing and talking about the future, Bryce realized something. Eastlaw had been wrong about many things, but she was right about one. This was the start of a new chapter in his life. But it wasn't the sad, lonely life she had predicted. It was full of possibilities, true friendships, and self-respect. For the first time in years, Bryce felt excited about the future. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Bryce silently thanked Eastlaw, not for the years they had spent together, but for finally showing him who she really was. It had been a painful awakening, but a necessary one. He was no longer Bryce Matthews, Eastlaw's husband. He was just Bryce Matthews, and he realized that was more than enough. Second story. "Hey everyone, I just want to share something with you. My girlfriend was with me recently, and we went out for lunch. We had a good time together. After that, I dropped her off at her house because she said she had a meeting and needed to be home by 6. So I did that. When I got home, I didn't feel right. My heart was racing for no reason. I texted her, and she said her friend was coming over before the meeting. I said okay, but I still didn't feel good. I decided to go see her, even though I'm not sure why. When I crossed her street, I saw her outside with another guy. When I saw that, I felt like I was dead inside. I couldn't feel anything. I went up to them, and I was told he was from work and was there because it was late and her boss didn't want her to go home alone. What do you all think?"